A billionaire CEO meets a fearless single mom on a snowy night, and what begins as a small act of kindness turns into a love story that could heal them both. Before we dive in, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. This is one story you won't forget. The city shimmered beneath a glaze of winter frost, its skyline stretched like glass dreams under a bruised indigo sky. Landon Pierce stood on the rooftop of his company's flagship tower, hands buried in the deep pockets of his designer coat collar, upturned against the wind. Below, the world moved like clockwork, flashing taillights, distant sirens, snow piling on curbs and rooftops. Up here, everything was still, but inside him something rattled. 2 floors down, the company's annual holiday gala buzzed with jazz music, laughter, and catered charm. Executives clinked glasses over performance charts. Venture capitalists smiled like sharks in velvet suits. Landon had been the reason for the celebration record-breaking growth, a new AI health diagnostics system. Headlines with his name, but somewhere between the applause and the shrimp cocktails, he'd slipped out. No one noticed. They never really did. His breath puffed in soft, ghostly clouds as he watched the streets. Somewhere in the dark grid of Minneapolis, people were struggling to survive while he stood swaddled in wool and cashmere trying to feel anything. He thought of the watch on his wrist. It could pay for someone's rent for a year. His shoes could send a kid to college. Yet here he was, hollowed out, every success echoing like an empty hallway. The kind of night where memory crept in with the cold. A voice returned to him, then his late wife, soft but firm. The higher you climb, Landon, the colder it gets. Make sure you're not dressing your soul in frost. She'd said that during his first venture pitch, barefoot in their tiny apartment, laughing over burnt popcorn. He hadn't listened. He'd climbed anyway, each rung bought with overtime, detachment, and sacrifice. And when she died, he buried his grief in code and quarterly forecasts. That warmth never came back. He turned abruptly and took the elevator down, not to the gala, but past the valet, past the sleek town car waiting with engine idling. The driver opened the door, confused. Mr. Pierce Landon kept walking, the crunch of snow beneath his steps louder than any reply. He didn't have a destination, just the ache of motion and the hope it might drown out the noise in his chest. The wind bit through his sleeves. Good, let it hurt. The streets were nearly empty. A few cars drifted by, their headlights fogged by snowfall. Landon walked with no rhythm, no path past shuttered bookstores and corner cafes with chairs stacked behind fogged glass. A violin melody leaked from an old stereo inside a closed coffee shop. Then it happened. A flicker in the corner of his eye. A human shape beneath the yellow haze of a flickering street lamp. At first he thought it was just another bundled stranger waiting for a late bus. But then the wind pulled aside a thin jacket, light blue hospital scrubs. A woman, slumped on a frozen bench, arms curled around a child. Landon stopped. The street lamp buzzed overhead. The child shifted in sleep, tiny hands exposed from frayed gloves. Her mother, because that's what she had to be, had her head leaned against the iron backrest, lashes crusted with cold, her skin pale as snowfall. Something split inside Landon. A quiet, unexplainable fracture. He didn't know why he stepped forward. Maybe it was the girl's breath catching in the cold, or the way the woman held her like a human shield against the world. Either way, he moved slowly, not wanting to startle them. The woman's eyes opened slightly. Dull, but alert. They met his. No fear. No expectation. Just exhaustion. "I'm not here to bother you," Landon said, his voice low, careful. "It's freezing out. I have a coat. Please take it." He shrugged it off without thinking. Cashmere Italian tailoring worth more than everything she was wearing combined. But none of that mattered. He stepped close and gently draped it over them both. She didn't flinch. She didn't say thank you. But her eyes blinked slower, softer, like her body had finally released something heavy. He stood back, unsure of what to say next. Snowflakes spiraled between them, quiet as ash. He wanted to ask 100 things. What happened? Where are you going? How can I help? But he didn't. It didn't feel like the moment for questions. Instead, he nodded toward the diner 2 blocks away. Tell them Landon sent you, he said. They'll feed you. No questions. Her expression didn't change, but she didn't look away either. That was enough. He turned and walked away, coatless hands stiff in the wind. When he reached the corner, he paused just for a breath. But he didn't look back. Something ached in his chest, something unfamiliar. He didn't sleep that night. The penthouse felt colder than usual, no matter how high he turned the thermostat. His fireplace remained dark, his inbox filled with congratulatory messages. But all he saw on every screen and every shadow was the image of a mother trying to survive. That was the night Landon Pierce, king of efficiency, architect of algorithms, remembered what it felt like to be human. And for the first time in years, he didn't want to forget. The diner was nothing special. Cracked vinyl booths, flickering overhead lights, and a smell that was equal parts bacon grease and burnt coffee, but that night, it might as well have been a palace. Rachel Brooks stepped inside, fingers wrapped tightly around her son Micah's mittened hand. Her boots left wet prints on the tile. Her eyes darted everywhere, the counter, the old waitress wiping menus with a rag. The clock that read 3:07 a.m. A woman behind the counter glanced up, then set down her mug like she'd been waiting. "You, Rachel?" she asked, not unkindly. Rachel froze. Her name hadn't been spoken by a stranger in weeks. She nodded slowly, unsure if this was a mistake. The waitress smiled. "Guy came in earlier. Said if a woman named Rachel showed up with a kid, she should be fed. Paid in advance. No questions asked." Rachel blinked, throat tight. What did he look like?" "Didn't leave a name," the waitress said. Then paused, pulling a business card from her apron. "Just this." She handed it over. One word. Landon. No title, no company name. Just Landon in bold serif letters, clean and deliberate, like he was daring the world not to remember him. Rachel didn't speak. She didn't trust her voice. The waitress pointed toward the booth near the heater. "It's warm there. Go on, honey." Rachel led Micah across the floor, her legs stiff from the cold, her back screaming from another night spent upright. She slid into the booth as Micah climbed up beside her, nose wrinkling as he sniffed the air. "Smells like waffles," he whispered. Rachel smiled faintly. "Yeah, it does." Moments later, a plate arrived, eggs, toast, sausage, and hot chocolate with too much whipped cream. Micah's eyes lit up like it was Christmas. She didn't touch the food at first. She just watched her son dig in, cheeks pink from the cold, his small fingers trembling from excitement or exhaustion, or both. Every bite he took was a strange kind of miracle. Rachel blinked quickly. She'd spent too many nights watching him pretend not to be hungry, so she wouldn't worry. Tonight he didn't pretend. He just ate. And Rachel, she didn't feel like a mother failing not tonight. She felt like a mother surviving. Barely, but still. The coat still lay across the bench beside them. Soft, expensive, too fine for a place like this. She had folded it when they left the bench, meaning to give it back somehow, but couldn't bring herself to do it. Inside the collar, the label read, "Made in Italy." She traced the stitching with her thumb. This wasn't a donation bin jacket. This was a decision. She didn't understand it. She wasn't sure she wanted to. As Micah finished the last of his toast, Rachel finally picked up a fork. Her hands shook. It had been days since they'd had something hot that wasn't from a church basement. But it wasn't just the food. It was the way it had arrived, with no expectations, no sermon, no strings. That was the part that unraveled her. Because kindness in her experience almost always came with a clause. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the card again. "Landon," she whispered to herself. The name sounded both unfamiliar and familiar, like something borrowed from a dream she used to have before life cracked open beneath her feet. Who leaves a coat and a meal with no explanation? Who shows up in a moment so sharp and disappears before it can dull? After they ate, Rachel tucked Micah's hat tighter over his ears and zipped up his hoodie. He was already nodding off his body, curling instinctively against the bench. She couldn't stay long. One meal didn't erase a dozen nights of risk, but for now, she let herself breathe. The heater behind her hummed steadily. The windows fogged from inside warmth. Outside, snow still fell in soft veils against the black glass. As they stepped back into the street, Rachel turned toward the north side of town. Not because it was safer, just because it was routine. She walked slower than usual. Not out of fatigue, but because something inside her had shifted. She didn't know what to call it yet. It wasn't hope. Not quite. More like a crack in the armor, a whisper that maybe not today, not tomorrow, but someday there could be more than survival. Later that morning, Rachel arrived at the Community Outreach Center, a squat brick building nestled between a shuttered laundromat and a pawn shop. She didn't work there, not officially, but the nurse in charge, Teresa, let her help sort medical kits and clipboards a few days a week. It wasn't much, but it gave her purpose. And sometimes, if there were extras, Teresa would slip her a pair of gloves or a tube of toothpaste. Small mercies. Rachel never asked. But today, Teresa gave her a strange look. "Someone came by asking for you," she said, casually. Rachel's stomach dropped. "Who, tall guy? Clean cut. Looked like he walked off a Forbes cover. Didn't give a name. Just asked if you were okay." I didn't say anything. Rachel's heart stuttered. He say why Teresa shrugged. Didn't push. Just left. Rachel nodded slowly. She didn't know what to think. She didn't want to think anything, but the name echoed in her mind like a challenge. Landon. That night she tucked Micah into the borrowed sleeping bag in their alley shelter behind the shelter. He mumbled something about waffles, then fell asleep instantly. Rachel sat beside him in the dark coat pulled tight around her shoulders. The card was still in her pocket. She didn't need another savior, but she couldn't stop herself from wondering, who was the man who didn't ask for anything? And why did that scare her more than the ones who always did? The next morning arrived wrapped in gray skies and brittle cold, the kind of morning that clings to your bones no matter how many layers you wear. Rachel stirred before the sun instincts honed by weeks of sleeping lightly, always listening for the wrong sound. But something felt different. It wasn't warmer, but it wasn't as bitter. She opened her eyes and realized it wasn't her hoodie draped across Micah's shoulders. It was the coat. The one from last night. Still heavy. Still warm. Still inexplicably theirs. Micah mumbled in his sleep and nestled deeper beneath it, his cheeks flushed but no longer trembling. Rachel exhaled slowly, the breath fogging the air before her lips. She sat up carefully, her back stiff from the concrete and her stomach sore from tension. Outside their alley shelter, the street was still asleep, snow painting quiet outlines over dumpsters and sagging fences. She held the coat in her lap for a long time, fingers brushing the stitched label again. Landon. Not a brand. A name. A man who had walked by stopped, and for some reason hadn't just kept walking. She didn't know what to make of it. She didn't believe in magic, not anymore. But the coat remained as real as the ache in her shoulders, and the memory of last night of eggs and whipped cream and the way her son smiled like he forgot to be afraid for just 5 minutes that stayed too. Rachel stood and stretched joints crackling, then gently woke Micah. He blinked up at her, then smiled sleepily. "Is it still warm?" he asked, clutching the coat tighter. "Yeah," she said softly. "It is." Later that day, Rachel found herself standing outside the diner again. Not because she was hungry, they couldn't afford another surprise like that, but because it was warm near the vent and she needed to think. She stared through the fogged-up glass at the booth they'd sat in, the steam curling from mugs, the low murmur of tired laughter. Then the door opened. A waitress she didn't recognize stepped out. "Are you Rachel?" Rachel froze. Again, with the name. "Yes," she answered cautiously. The woman smiled and reached into her apron. "Someone left this for you, said if you showed up I should give it to you." No pressure. She handed over a small white envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper. No message, just a printed reservation card. Room 3, Haven Motel. Paid for 1 week. Check in anytime. Rachel's fingers trembled slightly as she held the paper. This wasn't charity. Charity came with conditions. This was something else, something she didn't have words for. She stood there for a long moment as snow began to fall, again soft flakes landing on her hair like tiny echoes. She didn't go to the motel that night, not yet. Instead, she and Micah returned to their alley. She didn't trust comfort. It felt like a setup, like something you get used to only for it to vanish the second you relax. but she placed the envelope carefully in the side pocket of her duffel bag, zipped it shut, and lay awake most of the night listening to her son breathe. When he shifted in his sleep, he reached for her hand without opening his eyes. She gave it to him silently, like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. The following day at the community outreach center, Rachel moved quietly through the supply room, sorting boxes of gauze and expired aspirin. Teresa, the nurse in charge, gave her a look. "You okay today?" Rachel nodded, but the nod didn't mean what it used to. "Someone left a note for you at the front," Teresa said. "Same guy?" Rachel asked before she could stop herself. Teresa smirked. "Didn't say. Just asked if you were around. Didn't leave his name this time either." Rachel went back to sorting, but her hands moved slower. Her thoughts, however, raced. By sunset, she stood across the street from the Haven Motel, duffel bag over one shoulder, Micah holding her hand. He was tired. She could see it in the slump of his small shoulders. She glanced at the glowing red vacancy sign at the front office's lit window. Then wordlessly, she crossed the street. The clerk barely looked up, just slid a key across the desk with a nod as if all of this had already been arranged, which she supposed it had. Room 3. She opened the door slowly, like someone expecting a trap. Inside was nothing special. 2 beds, one thin dresser, a heater that hissed softly, but it was clean and warm. Micah rushed to the bed and bounced once before flopping onto it with a sleepy groan. "Mom," he whispered, "I can't feel my toes anymore." They melted. Rachel laughed. She hadn't meant to, but the sound escaped. She closed the door behind her and locked it, then stood in the middle of the room for a long while, just watching her son stretch across the bed like he belonged there. And for the first time in weeks, maybe longer, she allowed herself to sit, to breathe. That night, after Micah had fallen asleep beneath the motel blankets, his soft snores audible even over the heater, Rachel pulled the coat from her duffel. She sat at the edge of the bed with it folded in her lap. The card was still in the pocket. Landon. No last name. No message. Just the man with kind eyes and a quiet voice who didn't ask for anything. She didn't understand him, but she hadn't forgotten him either. The next morning, as sunlight leaked through the beige curtains and silence blanketed the room like a blessing, Rachel sat at the small motel desk with a hotel pen and the notepad they always left near the phone. She didn't write anything dramatic, just 5 words. "I don't know why yet." Then, after a beat, she added a 6th. "But thank you anyway." It started with a paper cup of coffee. Rachel stepped out of the community clinic with Micah's hand in hers and found him waiting across the street, leaning against a lamppost like someone pretending he wasn't watching. Landon looked up the moment he saw them, his breath fogging in the late afternoon air. "Hi," he said, almost shyly, extending the coffee like an offering. Rachel hesitated. She didn't like being found. But something in his voice, quiet, unsure, made it hard to be angry. She stepped forward, Micah tugging along beside her, curious as ever. "You don't give up easily," she said. Not accusing, just observing. Landon shook his head. "Not when something matters." He glanced at Micah, then knelt slightly. "Hey, kiddo. You like cinnamon rolls?" Micah nodded solemnly, wide-eyed. "Extra icing. Always." Landon smiled. Then, "I think we're going to get along." Rachel watched the exchange, arms crossed, unsure what game this was, but also aware people with power usually didn't kneel to children. It didn't escape her notice. They walked together to a nearby cafe, the kind with real pastries and too many kinds of milk. Rachel sat with her back to the wall, always needing to see the exit, while Landon ordered without asking her preferences, but returned with everything she liked: black coffee, a plain croissant, and warm milk for Micah, with just a dash of honey. She didn't ask how he knew. He didn't offer. Instead, he sat across from her like he wasn't a man who ran a tech empire, but someone who simply wanted to be seen by the person across the table. Micah buzzed with sugar and attention, chattering about library story time, favorite superheroes, and how his mom could make soup out of anything. Rachel winced at that last one, but Landon only smiled. "That's a superpower," he said. "Not everyone can turn scraps into comfort." Rachel looked down, unsure how to take the compliment. She wasn't used to being admired for survival. Afterward, they lingered outside snow, drifting lightly around them. Micah ran ahead to stomp footprints into fresh patches, leaving the adults behind in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. Landon turned to her. "You don't owe me anything," he said. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Then why keep showing up?" He exhaled. "Because most days I forget what it means to feel anything. And then I met you, and now I don't want to forget again." She wasn't ready for that answer. It hit somewhere soft. Somewhere she'd kept buried. "That's a big sentiment for someone you don't know," she murmured. "I'd like to," Landon replied simply, "if you'd let me." Rachel looked away. She was always looking away. But the truth was, no one had spoken to her like she mattered in a very long time, and not like a problem to fix, but a story worth learning. Over the next few days, their paths kept crossing. Landon would happen to be volunteering at the clinic drop-off, or seated on the back steps of the shelter with extra sandwiches he accidentally ordered. Micah adored him, which complicated everything. He laughed at Landon's jokes, dragged him by the hand through thrift store toy bins, and asked questions like, "Why do grown-ups stop believing in good people?" Rachel tried not to flinch when Landon always answered, "Not all of us have." One evening, as the snow fell heavier, Rachel found herself walking alongside Landon down a quiet stretch of sidewalk, Micah skipping ahead. Streetlights glowed like low moons, and their shadows stretched out beside them. "I don't trust Easy," she said suddenly, her voice low, almost apologetic. "I'm not asking for easy," Landon replied. "Just honest." She looked at him, and for once didn't look away. "I can't promise anything," she said. "Then promise nothing," he answered. "Just keep walking beside me." The tension between them wasn't fireworks. It was softer, slower. The kind of warmth that sneaks in without a sound and makes you realize you haven't breathed right in years. Landon never touched her without asking, never pressed, never filled silence with stories meant to impress. He just stayed, showed up again and again like the world hadn't taught him to disappear. One night, Rachel stood outside the motel room door, Micah asleep inside. Landon had walked them home from the community center and now lingered, uncertain whether to step away or speak. "You don't scare me," she said suddenly. He blinked. "I'm glad." "But what does she?" continued, voice smaller. "Is that part of me wants to believe this is real." Landon's expression softened. "So let's not rush it," he said. "Let's just let it be whatever it's going to be." She nodded, opened the door and stepped inside. But before she closed it, she looked back. "Good night, Landon." His smile was gentle. "Good night, Rachel." And that night, for the first time in months, she slept without dreaming of running. The file sat on Landon's desk like a wound he hadn't realized was bleeding. Morning sunlight slid across the floor of his penthouse, touching marble countertops, sleek leather chairs, and stainless steel appliances, but none of it reached him. He stood in the corner of his study, one hand braced against the glass, the other holding the quarterly implementation proposal he'd approved 6 months ago. A thick yellow highlighter line cut through the page like a blade. Projected reduction in nursing staff, 38% across affiliated facilities by Q4. The phrase sat in his chest like gravel. Once it had been just a number. An optimization. Something to shave off inefficiencies in a spreadsheet. But now, after Rachel, he read it differently. Not 38%. People. Jobs. Faces. Hands that once held frightened children. Voices that whispered comfort. Rachel's voice. Used to be a nurse. The phrase haunted him like a bad dream he hadn't woken up from. He stared at the file as if it might rewrite itself. He didn't sleep that night. Didn't eat much either. Just moved from one corner of his penthouse to the next, walking in circles, as if motion could untangle the knot building beneath his ribs. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to explain that he hadn't known. That when he signed that deal, he didn't see her. He didn't see anyone. That was the problem. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped looking. 2 nights later, he dressed for a gala he didn't want to attend. The invitation had come weeks ago. Black tie, champagne reception, donors, partners, board members. All people who lived in the same glass and steel orbit he'd called home for years. It felt like a betrayal just to be in the room. But image was still currency in his world. So he showed up, smiled at the cameras, made polite conversation, pretended. He slipped away from the ballroom halfway through the program, drawn by an odd familiarity in the corridor lined with framed photographs, moments of pride frozen in gold-leafed frames. Then he saw it. A picture taken 2 years ago. He stood beside Julian Vance, co-founder and friend turned partner, in quiet destruction, both of them smiling, hands shaking, with the director of Northern Lakes Medical Group. Between them, a novelty check, comically oversized $1.5 million. Pediatric systems integration. Landon's blood went cold. Northern Lakes. That was Rachel's hospital. The one where she worked. The one that closed its pediatric wing 6 months after that picture was taken. He remembered the presentation now: efficiency across network hubs, reduce overlap, shift staff to regional centers. It had sounded clean, logical. And now it felt like a scalpel in his gut. The check in the picture had been his signature. The closure, his fingerprint. He didn't finish the gala, didn't say goodbye. He left through a side door and stepped out into the snow, pulling his scarf tighter, though it did nothing for the chill inside him. When he got home, he opened the drawer where he kept Rachel's note, the first one she left in the motel, folded beside the coat. I don't know why yet, but thank you anyway. The grace of it cracked something deeper than guilt. It felt like forgiveness he hadn't earned. The next morning, he showed up at the community center, not to donate, not to volunteer, just to find her. Rachel was there, sleeves rolled up, handing out cough drops and hygiene kits. Her hair pulled back in a quick bun. She laughed at something an older man said, then turned toward the supply closet. That's when she saw him, and for the first time since he met her, she didn't smile, didn't frown either. Just watched. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly when she approached. They walked down the block in silence, boots crunching snow. Micah wasn't with her today. Landon didn't ask why. When they reached a small bench outside a laundromat, she stopped and folded her arms, waiting. "So talk," she said. "I think I was part of what happened to you," he said, the words dragging out like confession. "To the hospital. Your unit. I saw a picture. I remembered a deal I signed. A grant. Pediatric system shift." Rachel's expression didn't change, but her shoulders tensed. "You funded the shutdown." He shook his head. "I funded integration. I thought we were building something better: regionalized care, tech-supported efficiency. I didn't know they'd shut the pediatric wing. I didn't know it would." "That's the thing," Rachel said, her voice low, trembling with held-back fury. "You didn't know. Because you didn't ask. Because you were too far above it to see what it looked like when the money ran out." Landon opened his mouth, then closed it. She was right. "I worked doubles for a month straight because we were understaffed," she continued. "I held babies whose parents didn't speak English, whose charts didn't get updated because the night nurse got laid off. And when they closed the wing, they sent an email. No warning, no severance. Just effective immediately. You signed the check that did that, and now you show up with muffins and coats and expect what? That we forget." "No," he said, voice raw. "I don't want you to forget. I just needed you to know I see it now. I see you." Rachel blinked hard. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It's too late for a lot of us, Landon." She walked away, then steps fast, and sure her back a line of steel. He didn't follow. He stood there in the cold until the feeling returned to his hands. Then he went home and wrote the cancellation letter. It took 30 minutes to dismantle a deal that had taken 2 years to build. The email went out to Julian, to MedSphere, to every partner he knew would scream in meetings and slash budgets. But he didn't care. He wasn't going to keep profiting off people like Rachel. Not anymore. Julian showed up in his office the next day, face like thunder. "You're sabotaging the company," he said, slamming the door. "You blew up an 8-figure agreement." "I know," Landon replied calmly. "Because one woman got under your skin, no. Because I finally understand the cost of every line item we never looked at twice. You're being emotional. I'm being human." Julian stared at him like he didn't recognize the man in front of him. "You'll regret this," maybe Landon said, "but I won't be ashamed." 2 days later, a plain envelope appeared under his door. No stamp, just his name handwritten. Inside was a single note in Rachel's handwriting. "You should have told me sooner, but thank you." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Rachel had learned to expect disappointment. It arrived in many forms. Eviction notices, empty cupboards, the look in a social worker's eyes when they glanced at her file. But that night, standing at the corner where Landon had always waited with 2 coffees and that hopeful smile, she felt a different kind of dread, the quiet kind, the one that hummed beneath the skin and warned this isn't right. The wind whipped along the sidewalk as Micah bounced beside her, unaware, clutching a paper snowflake he made at the library. "Do you think Mr. Landon will like it?" he asked. Rachel forced a smile. "I think he'll love it," but her stomach was tight. Landon was never late, not without a reason, and Rachel knew deep down that this wasn't about traffic or a forgotten appointment. This was about truth, and how silence, when stretched long enough, becomes betrayal. She tucked Micah into bed that night, the snowflake resting on the nightstand like a fragile question. Once he drifted off, she stepped outside, boots crunching softly in the slush, heart pounding. The article she'd seen earlier in the day had been brief. Pierce Innovations withdraws from $22 million MedSphere deal. Most people wouldn't have looked twice. But Rachel did. MedSphere. That was the name printed on every hospital memo, every staff layoff announcement, every cost-saving restructuring that eventually left her out in the cold. Her fingers shook as she dialed Teresa, the clinic nurse who'd worked in the same hospital. "Do we still have the foundation documents from the MedSphere acquisition?" "Yeah," Teresa said, confused. "Why, read me the signatories." A pause. Then Julian Vance. And Landon Pierce. Rachel didn't hang up. She just let the receiver slip from her hand until it hit the concrete floor of the shelter hallway. Landon's name echoed in her mind like gunfire in a cathedral. He hadn't just been nearby. He hadn't just been a bystander. He'd been the architect. She sat on the steps for a long time that night, coat pulled tight, breath fogging in the dark. She thought about every moment she'd let herself believe in him. The muffins, the coat, the night he said, "I don't want to forget how to feel." And she realized what made it worse wasn't the betrayal. It was that part of her had wanted so badly to believe in something again. She ignored every warning sign carved into his silence. The next morning, she waited at the cafe where they always met. She watched him approach with 2 coffees and a paper bag, smiling like nothing had happened. "Morning," he said, setting the bag on the table. "Hope you're hungry. They had those cranberry scones." "Stop," she said flatly. He froze. "Did you know?" she asked. His brows drew together. "Know what?" "About the hospital. About the cuts. About me." Her voice cracked on the last word. Landon's expression shifted. Hesitation, realization, regret. "I didn't know you were affected," he said quietly. "I didn't even know which facility you worked at until—" "But you knew the deal," Rachel snapped. "You knew what it meant for nurses, for pediatric units, for people like me." "I thought we were innovating," he said. "I thought it would help." "Help who?" she asked, voice rising. "The shareholders, the board." Her breath quickened. Because it didn't help the mother who had to drive 90 miles to get antibiotics for her baby. It didn't help the nurses who went home every night wondering if their badge would scan the next day. "It didn't help me, Landon. I know," he said, the words coming thick. "That's why I canceled the contract. I didn't know then, but I know now. You should have known before you walked into my life with warm pastries and apologies." "You didn't say out loud," she said, eyes glistening. "You should have known before my son called you a hero, before I thought—" She stopped herself. Bit her lip. "Before I thought maybe we could be something." Landon reached out barely. "Rachel." "No," she said, stepping back. "You didn't come into my life to fix anything. You came to feel better about what you broke." Her voice didn't rise now, it dropped low and sharp like ice. "And I let you. That's on me. I didn't mean to hide it," he whispered. "I didn't remember your hospital until I saw the photo. I was blind. But I'm trying to change." "I don't need you to change," she said, voice hollow. "I need you to leave." The paper bag crinkled under her arm as she turned to go. She paused once, pulled the coat from her shoulder, his coat, the one he'd left on her bench weeks ago. She didn't throw it. She didn't fold it. She just let it fall to the ground between them. "Take that," she said. "You've given enough." Back at the shelter, Rachel crawled into bed beside Micah and watched the snowflake flutter where it hung by tape on the cracked wall. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But inside, something folded shut. Not anger, not bitterness, just quiet. A final tired kind of sadness that came when you realized someone had touched your heart with hands still stained from the last time they broke something. Landon texted the next day. "Just once. I'm sorry. For everything." Rachel stared at the screen until the words blurred, then deleted the message without replying. Not because she hated him, but because some apologies were too late to fix the fall. Landon knew the board would never forgive him. He knew it before he stepped into the conference room, before he clicked the remote to cast the first slide on the wall. The numbers weren't in question. The performance was spotless. Stock prices had risen 18% since Q3. Pierce Innovations was hailed in every publication as the future of healthcare technology, and now he was about to set it on fire. "I'm stepping down," he said, voice calm but final. Silence spread like a crack in the marble floor. Julian Vance leaned forward, fingers steepled, eyes hard. "Excuse me." Landon didn't repeat himself. Instead, he clicked again. The next slide lit up Sharon House Community Health Project. Nonprofit, independent, funded personally. "This is what I'm doing next," Landon said, "and I'm liquidating my shares to fund it." The room exploded. Board members barked objections. Legal advisors scrambled for paperwork. Julian stood. "You're making a mistake." "No," Landon replied, his gaze steady. "I made the mistake already. Now I'm making something else amends." Someone swore under their breath. Another muttered, "He's serious." And Landon just stood there, letting it all burn around him. His career, his reputation, his meticulously built empire. Because somewhere across town, there was a woman who needed more than words. She needed proof. After the meeting, he didn't go home. He went to the city planning office, filled out paperwork by hand, wrote checks to cover zoning permits and inspections. He found a building, an old community clinic, shut down 5 years ago, windows boarded, walls crumbling. He stood in the lobby alone, among dust and broken tiles, and saw it clearly: clean white walls, pediatric chairs, volunteers in scrubs. A place for people like Rachel. A place for people who'd been invisible. 2 weeks passed before the news hit the press. Tech giant resigns. Bets on public health. Headlines ranged from admiration to mockery. Julian called twice. Landon didn't answer. He didn't need approval anymore. He had blueprints, a lease, and a name for the building, Sharon House. He never told Rachel it was named after her mother. He figured one day she'd know. Volunteers trickled in slowly. Some former nurses, others just good people who wanted to help. Landon swept floors, painted walls, learned how to fix a leaky faucet. His hands, once used to signing contracts, now blistered from work. He slept in a trailer beside the building, woke at dawn, drank cheap coffee, and hammered until sunset. No one recognized him here, and for the first time in years, he didn't mind. One rainy afternoon, as he was hauling in a second-hand exam table, he heard someone behind him. "You missed a spot." He turned. Rachel stood in the doorway, her hair tucked under a hood, arms crossed. She looked thinner, tired, but there was something else in her eyes, a question she hadn't decided how to ask. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Wasn't expecting you." "I wasn't expecting this," she said, glancing around. "I saw the article." He nodded, unsure what to say. "You gave it all up," she said quietly. "Why?" "Because I needed you to know this isn't about guilt," Landon said. "It's about doing something that actually matters. And not just for you, for everyone we forgot." Rachel stepped inside, trailing her fingers along a half-painted wall. "You really think a building can fix what they broke?" "No," Landon replied, "but maybe it can start something better." There was silence between them then, not awkward, just full, like everything didn't have to be said right away. Rachel walked the length of the hallway, peeked into an unfinished exam room, then turned back. "Sharon House," she asked. "That was my mom's name." Landon smiled faintly. "I know." Later that evening, Rachel returned with Micah. The boy ran through the empty halls like they were a playground. Landon handed him a paint roller, and the three of them worked until dark. No promises were made. No apologies repeated. Just walls being covered, corners smoothed, and something new taking root where old wounds had lived. But the battle wasn't over. The next morning, Landon received an official notice a city inspector had flagged the project for violations. The fine was steep, the permit at risk. He stared at the letter heart thudding. "This isn't random," Teresa said. "She joined the volunteer board last week. This is Julian. He's pulling strings." Landon didn't flinch. "Then we pull harder." He took the letter, marched into City Hall, and refused to leave until he spoke to the commissioner. He pled their case not as a CEO, but as a man who finally understood what community meant. When he returned to Sharon House that night, the volunteers were waiting. Rachel stood in the middle, holding the letter. "It's been dropped," she said. "You did it." Landon looked around at them, all people he'd never have known if he stayed in his penthouse. People who didn't need rescuing, just a place to be seen. He exhaled deeply, and for the first time he felt like he belonged somewhere, not because he'd bought it, but because he helped build it. The night was quieter than most, even for that part of the city. Sharon House stood still under a soft veil of snow, its new paint glistening in the moonlight. Inside the hallway, lights glowed faintly like stars too tired to shine. Rachel wandered from room to room, checking corners, tidying supply shelves that didn't need tidying. There wasn't anyone left to impress, no task left unfinished. But something inside her refused to settle. She ended up in the intake room, fingers running slowly along the polished edge of a new countertop, marveling at how solid it felt. So much in her life had always been borrowed blankets, second chances, borrowed time. But this room, this was built. This had weight, purpose. She closed her eyes and let her hand rest on the counter as if the wood could steady her thoughts. Footsteps echoed behind her, soft but sure. She didn't turn. She already knew it was Landon. He had a quiet kind of presence, the kind you felt before you saw. "Hot cider," he said gently. "No caffeine after 9, right?" She looked at the mug he held out to her, steam curling toward the ceiling. "You remembered," she murmured, taking it. He leaned against the wall opposite her, still holding his cup, the silence between them stretching out like a bridge too fragile to cross. "I heard Micah rename the storeroom the Fortress of Bandages," Landon offered with a small grin. Rachel chuckled softly, the sound like warm light in a dark room. "He says it sounds cooler than inventory." They sipped their drinks in quiet for a while. Outside, the snow kept falling, flakes dancing across the windows in a hush that made the whole building feel like a secret. "Why did you name it Sharon House?" she asked finally. "You never told me." Landon looked into his cup for a moment before answering. "Because when you talked about your mom, something in your voice changed. I never met her, but I know the way people talk about the ones who taught them how to love the world, even when it doesn't love them back. You said she used to stay late to walk patients to their cars, that she brought gloves from home during flu season. I wanted this place to feel like that, like her, like you." Rachel's eyes shimmered, though she blinked the tears away before they could fall. "She would have liked that," she whispered. "She would have liked you too. Maybe not right away." Landon smiled softly. "I'm used to earning it late." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, worn, creased the edge of the paper softened by time. "I wrote this after the gala, after I realized what I'd done, what I hadn't seen. It's not perfect, but it's honest." He held it out with both hands. "You don't have to read it. I just needed you to have it." Rachel stared at the envelope like it might burn her fingers, but she took it, tucked it into her coat without a word. She didn't say thank you. He didn't expect her to. Some things weren't about closure, they were about accountability. They finished their cider in silence. When she finally said goodnight, it was soft and low, a crack in the ice, a small surrender. Back in the small apartment above the clinic, long after Micah had curled up under his favorite blanket with a flashlight and a superhero comic, Rachel sat by the window holding the letter. She hadn't touched it in hours. She didn't know why she'd waited so long. Maybe she was afraid it would be another performance, another gesture. But when she opened it, her breath caught. Rachel. I was raised to believe that power lived in distance, that control was the goal. I built my world in numbers and outcomes. But you showed me something else, something softer, stronger. I didn't see what was right in front of me. I didn't see you, and that's on me. But I want you to know I carry that now, not to punish myself, but to remember. You taught me that care isn't convenient, that love shows up with splinters and bruised pride and paint under its nails. I don't know if I'll ever be the man I should have been from the start, but I'm trying. Every day. Not to fix what's broken, but to build something better beside you. Landon. The words hit her slowly like snow melting on skin. Honest, imperfect, real. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was offering change. The next morning, she found him scrubbing the windows of the reception room, sleeves rolled up, sweat at his temples. He didn't see her at first, just kept working, humming some off-key tune that Micah probably taught him. She watched him a moment before stepping inside. You missed a spot, she said quietly. He turned startled, then smiled. That's your job now, isn't it? Maybe, she replied. She held the letter in her hand. I read it. He nodded, heart thudding. And I think she paused, breathing in deeply. I believe you're doing the work, not to win something back, just because it matters now. Landon swallowed hard. It does. I can't promise where this is going, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. But I'm not angry anymore, just cautious, and tired of being alone in this fight. She stepped closer. So, if you're still willing to build something with no guarantees, no shortcuts, then I'm willing too. His voice was low. Always. Rachel surprised him then. She reached out and hugged him, not out of pity or performance, but out of need. Her arms wrapped tight around his back, and his folded around her like something natural. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Forgiveness didn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it just walked into the room with tired eyes and said, I'm still here. That night, after Micah was asleep, Rachel wrote her own letter. She didn't sign it, didn't even fold it neatly. She left it on her nightstand next to the cup of tea she hadn't finished. It read, You didn't fix me. I was never broken. But you stayed, and you listened, and that changed everything. The wind was sharp that morning, crisp and biting, but inside, Sharon House warmth pulsed through the walls like a heartbeat. The clinic was open unofficially. There was no grand ceremony, no ribbon, no speeches. Just Rachel unlocking the front door at dawn, and Landon already inside balancing a tray of paper cups filled with hot cocoa that Micah had insisted they offer to everybody, even the grown-ups. Rachel paused in the doorway, watching Landon fumble with the tray, nearly tipping it as he tried to keep his clipboard tucked under one arm. He didn't see her yet, and for a moment she didn't say anything. She just watched him. This man who had once lived in glass towers, who now had paint on his jeans and flour dusted across his shoulder. She hadn't known she'd fall for him. It had just happened, like spring after a long cold season. Careful, she said finally, stepping forward, catching one of the cups before it fell. He looked up startled, then smiled. You always show up right when I'm about to ruin everything. Maybe I just know when to catch you, she said softer than she meant to. Their eyes held for a breath too long. Then Micah burst through the back hall yelling about cinnamon muffins and broke the spell. That day they saw their first 10 patients uninsured, unseen, unheard. People who had stopped asking for help because too many doors had slammed in their faces. But here, Rachel greeted them with the calm grace of someone who had once stood in their shoes. Landon watched her move, precise, gentle, unfazed by chaos. She didn't just fix people, she restored them. During a lull between patients, he stepped into the intake room with a clipboard and 2 steaming cups of coffee. Peace offering, he said, holding one out. She took it, her fingers brushing his. You're not in trouble. Yet, he smirked. She sat beside him on the exam table, her scrubs wrinkled hair falling from her bun, and yet she'd never looked more alive. "I never thought I'd find my way back here," she admitted. "Not just nursing, but this. Feeling like what I do matters again." He turned toward her. "You make it matter." Their eyes locked. Close. Close enough, but not yet. The week passed in a blur of movement and moments, Micah organizing tongue depressors by color, Landon fixing a broken sink with YouTube and stubbornness, Rachel teaching a teenage volunteer how to read a blood pressure cuff. Every night they left together exhausted, but more connected than the night before. He'd walk her and Micah upstairs to their apartment above the clinic and linger just long enough that goodbye always felt like the hardest word. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the city painting, the windows amber, Rachel found herself standing on the clinic's back stairwell, watching Landon refill the generator's fuel tank. He looked up, caught her gaze, and grinned. "Didn't know I had an audience." "You always do," she replied, and he blushed, not the practiced charm of a CEO, but the real quiet flush of a man completely undone. She came down the steps. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I finally built something I don't want to escape from," he said. "Like if this is it, if this is the rest of my life, I'm okay." He looked at her, his voice softer now. "But I want that life to be with someone. With you." Her breath caught the snow crunching faintly beneath her boots. "That's a big sentence, Landon. So's the truth." She stepped closer, inches between them now, the generator humming behind them like distant thunder. "You scared me," she whispered. "Not because of what you did, but because you saw me, really saw me. And I wasn't ready for that. I'm not here to save you," he said, "just to stand beside you." A beat. Then another, and then she kissed him. It wasn't long, it wasn't dramatic, but it was everything. Months of tension, grief, rebuilding it all dissolved into that one touch, gentle and unguarded. When they pulled apart, Rachel rested her forehead against his. "We still have a lot of work to do." "I know," he whispered, "but we're doing it together." From that night on, there were small changes. She held his hand on walks to the bus stop. He left notes on the break room fridge with reminders like, "Don't forget to eat," and "You're incredible." They never talked about labels or plans. They just lived day by day, growing something neither of them thought they deserved, but both of them had earned. Sharon House wasn't just theirs anymore, it belonged to everyone who walked through its doors. But the way Rachel looked at Landon across the patient files, or how he always saved the last cup of coffee for her, it was clear something had taken root deeper than bricks and blueprints. And this time, neither of them would let it go. The snow had stopped the night before, leaving the world soft and quiet like someone had pressed pause on the chaos. Sunlight spilled onto the sidewalk in golden streaks, turning the icicles on Sharon House's roof into glassy prisms. Inside, the smell of fresh flowers and cinnamon wafted through the halls. Today was the grand opening officially, and for the first time in years, Rachel wasn't watching something end. She was watching it begin. Volunteers buzzed around in matching blue t-shirts, setting up stations for flu shots, blood pressure checks, and warm meals. Micah handed out hand-drawn signs that said, "You matter here," taping one to every room. Rachel adjusted the welcome banner hanging above the entrance, then stood still for a moment, taking it all in. The waiting room, once echoing with emptiness, now felt like it was humming with possibility. Landon found her near the supply closet, holding a clipboard and pretending not to be nervous. He stepped beside her and leaned in. "You're doing that thing again," he said. "What thing?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "That thing where you don't breathe when things matter." She smiled, exhaled. "I guess I'm still waiting for someone to say we don't deserve this. Then let me be the first to say we absolutely do." At 10 on the dot, the doors opened. People streamed in, not in overwhelming crowds, but in steady, grateful waves. Parents with strollers, veterans with folded caps, teenagers looking for warmth and Wi-Fi. Rachel greeted every single one with a smile and a kind word while Landon moved through the room making coffee, answering questions, and fixing a last-minute paper jam with more pride than he'd ever felt signing a merger. The mayor gave a short speech, generic and rehearsed, but Rachel barely heard it. She was watching Micah give a shy hug to an elderly woman who'd brought him mittens she knit herself. Landon stood beside her, their shoulders brushing, and whispered, "No offense to the mayor, but this is the moment I care about." Rachel laughed quietly. "Me too." By noon, every exam room was full, but no one seemed frustrated by the wait. People chatted in the lobby, swapping stories and laughter. A local musician strummed soft jazz near the coffee table. Rachel found herself blinking back tears more than once. This wasn't just a clinic. It was a home for those who'd had none. And it had been built from heartbreak, from courage, from the hands of two people who hadn't known how to trust, but learned together anyway. That afternoon, as the sun hit its highest point, and light poured through the high windows in golden shafts, Landon pulled Rachel aside to the side courtyard, just for a moment. She followed him without question. He led her to a small wooden bench beneath the first blooming cherry tree, just beginning to frost with pale pink. "I wanted you to see this spot," he said. "It was always here behind the clinic, boarded up and forgotten. I thought maybe we could call it the garden room, a place to breathe." She stared at the small plaque nailed to the bench. "For those who stayed, for those who still hope." Her throat tightened. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Landon turned toward her. "You built this, Rachel. Not the bricks. Not the papers. This. The people. The healing." "We built it," she corrected. "Don't disappear on me now." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not unless you tell me to." They sat in silence, the tree's shadow brushing their shoulders. Finally, Rachel reached over and took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "I never thought I'd be able to start over," she said. "But maybe it was never about starting over. Maybe it was about starting again, with someone who knows where you've been." "Then let's start again," he whispered. The snow began falling just before dawn, fine powdery flakes that drifted slowly, like even the sky wanted to take its time that morning. Rachel stood on the front steps of Sharon House, gloved hands wrapped around a thermos of tea eyes on the horizon. The sign above the door was freshly painted, the windows gleaming the rooms behind her already warm with light. This was it, the real opening, the first full day of care, the beginning of something built not just from blueprints, but from heartbreak, resilience, and impossible hope. Landon joined her in the silence, his coat collar pulled up against the cold, a travel mug in one hand. "You couldn't sleep either?" he asked. Rachel smiled, soft and sleepy. "Too many nerves. Too much joy." She glanced sideways at him. "Too many feelings, probably." He bumped her shoulder lightly. "You and me both." By the time the clock hit 8, the staff had arrived, stomping snow off their boots, arms full of files and food. The waiting room buzzed gently, quiet laughter, the sound of chairs moving, the occasional squeak of Micah's sneakers as he dragged a welcome mat into place. Rachel watched it all with her arms folded, a smile tucked into the corner of her mouth. She'd never seen anything come alive this beautifully. Outside, the snowfall thickened, cloaking the street in softness, but inside it was all warmth and color. Local artists had donated prints, sunflowers, city skylines, smiling children. Rachel moved room to room, checking charts and handing out thank yous, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail, her steps confident. Landon followed at a distance, watching her the way she touched everything like she was claiming it with care. He wondered if she knew she was the soul of the place. Late morning brought a moment of stillness. Rachel stepped into the hallway just as Landon came around the corner, their eyes locking in the hush. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a folded note. "Micah gave this to me this morning," he said. "Told me to read it when I felt scared." Rachel unfolded the paper. Crayon handwriting, misspelled but earnest. "You are brave like my mom. She always shows up." Her breath caught, eyes misting. "He doesn't know what kind of man you used to be. He just sees the one you've become." Landon looked down, heart twisting in the best way. "Then maybe I've done something right." At lunchtime, a soft guitar melody drifted in from the break room. One of the volunteers played folk songs by memory while patients sipped broth and chatted quietly. Rachel and Landon sat on the floor beside the supply cart plates of soup on their laps. If we ever write a book about this place, she said the first chapter has to be called Love Without Apologies. He looked over. Is that what this is? She met his eyes, steady and warm. It's what it's become. They didn't kiss then. They didn't need to. But her hand found his on the floor between them, and she laced her fingers through his without hesitation. He gave the slightest squeeze like a promise. In the afternoon, they held a small ceremony. Nothing fancy. Just Micah reading a poem he wrote about snow and kindness, his voice loud and proud as he stood on a step stool by the reception desk. People clapped. Rachel beamed. Landon, from the back of the room, wiped his eyes behind his sleeve. As dusk crept closer, the snow outside deepened. The glow from Sharon House's windows lit the sidewalk, gold casting long shadows across the white. Inside, Rachel turned off the overhead lights one by one until only the lobby remained softly lit. Landon watched her from the far side of the room, everything in him quiet. "I never said thank you," she murmured, coming to stand beside him. "For what he asked. For not giving up. On this. On me." He shook his head. "I didn't build this place for you. I built it because of you." "That's not the same." She looked up at him, lips parted like she might say something else, but instead she reached up, pulled him down by the collar of his coat, and kissed him. It was slow. Certain snowflakes pressed to the glass behind them like frozen confetti. When they pulled apart, Rachel's forehead rested against his. "I want to do this," she whispered. "All of it. With you. And I want to stop being afraid of how much I love you." He smiled wider than she'd ever seen. "Then let's stay brave." They stepped outside together into the snowfall boots, crunching quietly. Micah raced ahead, laughing, arms stretched wide like wings. Behind them, Sharon House glowed in the dark, the sign above the door haloed by light. And in the falling snow, with their fingers intertwined, their hearts steady, Rachel and Landon began again, not as survivors, not as saviors, but simply as two people who had chosen to love with eyes wide open. Spring arrived slowly, almost shyly. The snow melted in quiet layers, and tulips began pushing through the frost-hardened earth around Sharon House's entrance. The clinic was thriving now, every day, filled with footsteps, laughter, healing. But this morning, it was still. Not empty, just reverent. Rachel stood alone in the lobby, sunlight tracing patterns on the floor. Her hands gently straightened a framed photograph on the wall. In it, a ribbon-cutting Micah in the center with scissors too big for his hands, and Landon at her side, both of them mid-laugh. The day Sharon House became real. She turned slowly as Landon entered behind her. He carried a box marked Archive filled with flyers, letters, Polaroids, and Micah's hand-drawn signs from day one. "You sure you're okay with this?" he asked. She nodded. "It's not an ending. It's a legacy." He set the box down gently, his eyes scanning the room like someone memorizing it all. "We built something that's going to outlive us," he said quietly. "That's terrifying and beautiful." Upstairs, Micah packed the last of his notebooks into his backpack. He was taller now, growing into his smile, already planning for college. "Will they still remember me here?" he asked, half joking. Rachel kissed his forehead. "You were the heart of this place before it had a name. They'll never forget," he grinned. "Promise you'll visit." "Every year," she replied. "This place isn't a goodbye. It's a starting line." Back in the hallway, Rachel found Landon by the courtyard window staring out at the cherry blossom tree now in full bloom. They had planted it their first spring, never knowing it would become the symbol of renewal for the entire neighborhood. He turned when he felt her presence. "You ever think about how close we came to never finding any of this?" "All the time," she said. "But maybe that's the point. You don't stumble into miracles. You earn them, one broken piece at a time." Later that day, the board gathered in the garden room. Rachel gave a short speech, nothing formal, just words from the heart. "We didn't start Sharon House to change the world," she said. "We started it to remind the world that people matter. That healing doesn't always look like medicine. Sometimes it looks like someone remembering your name. Sometimes it looks like a warm place to sit a hand on your shoulder. And sometimes she looked at Landon. It looks like forgiveness. Applause followed, but it wasn't loud. It was intimate, emotional. Several volunteers wiped away tears. One elderly woman leaned forward and whispered, "You gave us a reason to believe again." Rachel smiled at her, then stepped back, letting the moment speak louder than she ever could. As the sun began to dip behind the rooftops, Landon and Rachel walked the halls one last time before their move to a new project, another city, another forgotten clinic waiting for new hands. Each room they passed carried memories. A laugh here, a cry there. The echoes of lives touched not by grand gestures but by daily grace. They stopped in the intake room, the very first room they finished. Rachel rested her palm on the doorframe, her voice soft. "It always felt like the heart, didn't it?" Landon nodded. "This is where everything changed, where you first trusted me to stay." She turned toward him. "What made you?" He smiled. "You didn't run from your past. You brought it with you. And somehow you still had room to carry mine too." She stepped forward, arms wrapping around him slowly, deliberately. They stood there holding each other, not because they had to, but because they still wanted to. That to them was love. That evening, as the final lights dimmed and Sharon House fell into gentle quiet, Micah left a small note on the front desk. Just one line: "Love built this." Underneath, he signed it with a tiny drawing of the tree in the garden. Rachel found it later and tucked it into her coat pocket like a prayer. Outside, the cherry blossoms swayed in the evening wind petals, falling like promises, soft, bright, fleeting. Rachel looked back once before closing the door, her fingers trailing along the frame. "We'll be back," she said. "Or someone else will. And that's enough." Landon slipped his hand into hers. "Think we'll ever stop trying to fix the world?" She glanced up at him, eyes sparkling. "No. But we might learn how to live in it better." They stepped into the night, leaving behind the building, but not the belief. Never the belief. And as their figures disappeared into the light pink dusk, one question lingered, for everyone who had walked through those doors, been changed, healed, forgiven. If two broken people can build something that saves others, what could you do with your pain?